All right, you're excused. Thanks for your here. Call your next witness.
Judge, the defense calls John Sawicki.
Okay.
I'll go grab him, Judge.
Some courthouses have a witness room where we can kind of intercom to the witnesses to come in. We don't have anything like that, so the lawyers just have to go grab the witnesses. The bailiffs have special, particular assignments. We don't send the bailiffs out to get witnesses. Face the card for this one, please.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Have a seat. Slide up the microphone, please.
May I inquire, Judge?
You may.
Could you please introduce yourselves to the members of the jury?
My name is John Sawicki, S-A-W-I-C-K-I.
And that's J-O-H-N or J-O-N?
J-O-H-N.
Could you tell the members of the jury how you're employed?
I'm a forensic computer scientist and an electronic evidence consultant.
What does that mean?
Essentially what that means is I dig through computers, cell phones, cell phone records, attempt to determine what the user's done with the device, document what I find, and prepare to testify about it later.
Do you spend any time conducting research with regards to cell tower analysis?
I do.
How long have you been employed in this manner?
I started my company in 2011. I left my law practice to do this full-time in 2013.
So before you became an expert in this field, or someone that testifies with regards to this field, you were an attorney?
I was, yes.
And how long were you an attorney?
I spent about 7 or 8 years practicing mostly labor and employment litigation.
Not criminal defense?
Not criminal defense, except for maybe a rare case.
Are you admitted to practice law in the state of Florida?
I am.
Do you have any other special licenses?
I have a private detective's license in Georgia.
And before that?
I spent 9 years with the Douglas County, Oregon Sheriff's Office.
So, law enforcement, private investigator, attorney, and now you testify with regards to this specialty.
Yes, sir.
What kind of education do you have, if you don't mind me asking?
I have an undergraduate degree from George Fox University in Management and Human Resources. I have a law degree from Florida State University. I have a graduate certificate in computer forensics from the University of Central Florida. I have a master's degree in digital forensics from the University of Central Florida.
In addition to those degrees, do you have any specialized training in the field that you work in?
Yeah, I have somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 to 700 hours of specialized training in computer and forensics applications, interpreting cell tower records, how cell phone networks operate.
Do you have any training specifically in the area of cell tower analysis?
I do.
And can you tell the members of the jury what this training is?
Yeah, I've had training from a company called Access Data in how call detail records work, how to interpret them. Training from a company called Terracom Training Institute, again, in how cell tower networks function and operate. Took a course from a company called PA Tech in how to map cell calls, cell tower activity. I've done graduate level coursework in the area of radio frequency engineering through the University of California, San Diego's extension program.
About how many cases have you been in involving cell tower analysis?
Somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 or 700.
And have they all been criminal cases?
No, they have not. We've started using cell tower analysis in civil cases as well.
Have you ever given expert testimony in this area?
I have, probably 50 or 60 times.
And does that mean that you've testified 50 or 60 times?
Somewhere in that range. I don't have a complete log, but it's in that neighborhood.
And these testimonies are in state or federal court of both?
State and federal court in states across the country.
How many of the Florida judicial circuits have you given expert testimony in?
At this point, I believe 15.
And how many are there in total?
There are 20.
So 15 out of 20?
Yes, sir.
And what circuit are we in here?
This would be the Second Judicial Circuit.
And how many times have you testified in the Second Judicial Circuit?
A handful.
How many cases on your caseload are criminal versus civil in percentage-wise?
It fluctuates depending on the particular time, but at this point, probably 60 or 70% are criminal.
Have you presented any training courses in this area of expertise that you have?
I have. I routinely provide continuing legal education training to judges and lawyers throughout Florida and Georgia in how cell tower networks operate, how electronic devices store data, and how to extract that data.
Your Honor, at this time, I will tender Mr. Sawicki as an expert witness.
Any more to hire?
No, Judge.
All right, may proceed.
Okay, so you're familiar with this case, correct?
I am.
And my firm has retained you with regards to your expertise in this field, correct?
Yes, sir.
And my firm represents Mr. Garcia, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you've gotten all the calls and the iCloud stuff and all the other data that the jury's seen today, correct?
I don't know what the jury's seen today, but I've certainly had the opportunity to review a vast amount of data.
And it's a lot of stuff, right?
There's a lot of material.
Okay. So you're aware that there's a defendant in this case named Rivera, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you're aware that there is, I don't know if I call him a target or the person of interest, but you're aware who, you know who Charlie Adelson is, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you know what kind of phone Rivera had?
I understand he had an iPhone.
And when I'm talking about what kind of phone he had, I mean during the relevant portion of this case from June 2014 till, let's say, July 2014.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So Rivera had an iPhone, that was your testimony?
As I understand it.
And what about Charlie Adelson? You know what kind of phone he had?
I understand he had an iPhone as well.
And how would you know this? How do you get this information?
From the records that I've reviewed.
Okay, and from the records you reviewed, can you tell the members of the jury, like, you got an AT, like, they both had an AT&T, correct? Or at least I know Rivera had AT&T, correct?
I believe they both had AT&T, yes.
And when you get certain information from subpoenas from AT&T, do they provide this information to you? What kind of phone was used?
They do. There's a series of records that you get in response to subpoenas or search warrants that the government did in this case. You get subscriber records, which would indicate who an account holder would be when the account was established, potentially the address for the individual. You also get call detail reports that list different activities on the phone. In the case of AT&T, it could be phone calls, SMS and MMS text messages, and data records as well.
So, with regards to iPhones, do iPhones have the ability to make a call or to send a message that would not show up on a call detail report?
They do.
Okay. Explain to the members of the jury how something like this would happen.
So the call detail record essentially shows the transaction I was just talking about, the phone calls and the text messages. It also shows the data, but that's like one big bucket, so you don't get to see every individual piece that's within it. But the phone is able to use a variety of different messaging platforms, calling platforms, that'll never actually show on a call detail report as a phone call or as a text message.
Now, have you reviewed the iCloud extraction for Charlie Adelson in this case?
I have.
And when did you do that?
Most recently over the weekend.
This last weekend?
Yes, sir.
And did you find any evidence of deleted material in Charlie Adelson's iCloud?
I did.
What does that mean?
So there's really two different components to deleted material. The first piece, let me take a step back. The iCloud shows material from the phone that's been backed up to the cloud, somebody else's server across the internet. And so in this case, it happens to be Apple's server, and Apple stores those backups. That's kind of like taking a snapshot of the phone throughout time. In this particular iCloud backup, we can actually see that there is deleted material that's been marked as deleted, both in the areas of phone calls and text messages.
Are you able to show other deletions that aren't detailed in the iCloud data?
We can. One of the ways that we can do that is we can look to areas where we know how many particular events occurred and see if that matches with the number of events that are shown within the iCloud report. So for example,
Could you give us a specific example?
sure. For example, within the iCloud report, we see SMS messages and MMS messages. We also see those within the call detail report.
And hold on. Are we talking about anyone in particular in this case? This is still Charlie Edelson's, correct?
Well, we're speaking in general about AT&T and iClouds, but specifically for Mr. Adelson, we can see that as well.
Was there a specific example on Mr. Adelson's iCloud account that you could tell the members of this jury which highlighted these deletions?
Yeah, we were able to compare SMS and MMS messages for particular periods of time, and I think there were two different sets of call detail reports that I looked at to compare the call detail report to the iCloud information to see what was actually there. And what we saw was a significant number of messages that appeared within the call detail report that didn't show up within the iCloud information.
So that means that there is a record of an actual event taking place, right?
Yes, sir.
And so iCloud is like, and you described this to me the other day, so I want you to describe it to the members of the jury, because I didn't understand how iCloud works. Can you tell the members of the jury how iCloud keeps track of your data?
So the iCloud data is essentially your phone automatically backing itself up to a computer remotely. And it does this, depending on how it's set up, at regular intervals or when you force it to do so. And so you effectively get a number of different snapshots of what it looks like across time.
So let me ask you a question. So if an iPhone, let's say Charlie Edelson's iPhone backs up at 9 o'clock, okay? And well, let's say from 1 o'clock to 9 o'clock is when they do its data retrieval. And someone sends a message at 4 o'clock and then deletes it. Would it be part of the call detail report?
It should be part of the call detail report if it's sent as a text message.
Would it be in the iCloud?
Not necessarily. It could show in a couple of different ways. It could show, well, actually I take that back. It only show in one way. It could show as deleted. If it's still sitting within the database within the phone for text messages at the time that it backs up, it could still show as a deleted text message. Or if it's been overwritten from that point, it won't show up at all.
Well, what about, let me give you, I know that we talked about this. Let's tell the members of the jury what you found out when you ran an analysis between May 1st of 2014 and June 20th of 2014 for Charlie Edelson. Do you remember how many messages were on his phone using SMS and MMS?
If I could look at my notes.
Of course you can. Let me take a look, refresh the recollection, and let's adequately refresh the recollection.
For the call detail report from May 1st to June 20th, there were 3,084 SMS and MMS messages. Within the iCloud, there were 1,241.
So, I'm terrible with math, so let me go to my calculator here. So there were 3,084 messages, and 1,084 of them appeared. That means there were 1,800 messages that were sent that don't appear in the iCloud documentation, correct?
That's correct.
That's more than half.
It appears that way.
Now, did you review any other time period? I mean, obviously you know between May 1st and June 20th is kind of the beginning phases of this conspiracy, coming up to a relevant portion of this conspiracy. You're aware of that, correct?
Yes, sir.
Well, did you review any other time periods to see if this was a consistent thing that Mr. Adelson did?
I reviewed a second set of call detail reports from Mr. Adelson from June 18th of 14 through July 18th of 14.
And during your review, how many messages were sent via SMS and MMS?
The call detail reports shows 1,587 messages sent.
From Charlie Edelson? From
Yes,
his
sir.
phone?
Well, sent or received.
Okay, sent or received. How many of those appeared in the Celebrite extraction?
789.
So 1,587 minus 789. Sorry, 1,587 minus. All right, minus 789. So that means that 798 of those messages are gone, almost half.
It's a significant number.
And is there any way to account for what those messages said or who they were sent to?
There's not.
Can you explain this difference?
All I can say is it's not in the iCloud backup when that was created. So it could have been deleted. There could have been some other reason it didn't back up to the cloud, but all we know is it wasn't captured.
Have you seen the iCloud data for Luis Rivera?
I have not.
You have not.
No, sir.
What about Katie Magbanua?
I've seen minimal iCloud data for Ms. Magbanua.
Have you reviewed Katie Magbanua's cell tower usage for the morning of July 19th, 2014?
I have.
Did your review of Mr. Adelson's iCloud, during your review, pardon me, of Mr. Adelson's iCloud account, did you find evidence of other communication platforms?
I did.
Okay. Was there evidence that he had a messaging app called WhatsApp?
There was.
What about Threema
There was.
and FaceTime?
Yes, sir.
So is it possible that Charlie Adelson communicated directly with Luis Rivera?
I can't exclude that possibility.
And that's based on the fact that he had these other messaging apps, correct?
Yes, sir.
Have you reviewed Ms. Magbanua's phone records?
I have.
And were you able to identify the towers her phone used at the time the government said that suggested that she was in Jessica Rodriguez's apartment on, I believe, July 19th, 2014?
I was.
Where are those towers located?
The towers that I understand the government believes, well, the call detail reports indicates she was using between 10:02 and 10:32 on the morning of the 19th. The tower is located about 2/3 of a mile southeast of Miss Rodriguez's home, right on Biscayne Boulevard.
And is that tower located in between Charlie Adelson's address in Broward and Miss Magbanua's residence in Miami Beach?
I believe it is, yes.
And have you ever been to Miami?
I have.
And would you disagree that Biscayne Boulevard is one of the most common travel routes in South Florida for Miami?
I can't speak to most common, but it is a heavily traveled street.
Now, let me ask you a question. How, with regards to the antennas on that tower, how has Sprint identified the antennas on that tower?
There's actually two sets of antennas on the tower.
And I'm sorry, let me ask you that. I forgot to ask you. Ms. Magbanua's phone is with the Sprint network, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so, how has Sprint identified the antennas on that tower?
There are actually two sets of antennas on the tower which basically overlap one another. They've numbered the two sets as 7740 and 6740.
Okay. How are these antennas laid out?
So it's not unlike a typical cell structure in that we do have three antennas. Now, while many cell structures are laid out with each of those focused at 120-degree angles from one another, so that you would have one at 0 degrees, one at 120 degrees, one at 240 degrees, these are shifted slightly.
And do you know what they are?
If I could refer my notes.
Yeah, please. So normally it's 0, 120, and 240, correct?
Correct. In this case, it's 10 degrees, 200 degrees, and 260 degrees. So they've shifted them slightly.
And do you know why the antennas aren't at the optimal 120-degree angle?
Well, in this case, you have a highly traveled street which runs right next to the antenna, so it would make sense if they were shifted to increase the capacity. Antenna 1, which would be to the north, is pointed slightly to the northeast, so it essentially points right down Biscayne Boulevard. The other two antennas, which are pointing to the southeast and southwest, frankly, they're both pointing to the southwest slightly, have been shifted so they would shoot down the south of Biscayne Boulevard. Essentially what it does is it creates additional coverage in the area.
And this is the area between Ms. Magbanua's residence and Charlie Adelson's residence, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, were you able to determine the frequency of how often Ms. Magbanua's phone used that tower between May of 2014 and September of 2015?
Yeah, approximately 1,100 times that her phone used that cell tower.
So do you have a percentage of the amount of time that her phone was being used?
Yeah, it's about 11.5% of the overall antenna usage that they were able to track. And what I mean by that is there's numbers of calls which Sprint hasn't recorded the antenna that's actually being used for. So for those that they're actually able to establish a tower, about 11.5%. It was
Right.
actually the third most used tower.
So about a little over 10% of her time is between those areas, correct? It marks off with that cell tower.
Correct.
Give me 1 second, Joe. I have no further questions, Mr. Sawicki. Thank you.
Magbanua.
Yes, sir, thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What's your name again?
John Sawicki.
Have we ever met before?
I can't tell you for sure.
You're not our expert on this case, right?
No, sir.
You're tied over to Sigfredo Garcia.
Yes, sir.
Quick question, quick topic. What is kicking for a tower?
Kicking. I'm not familiar with that as a technical term. If you're referring to the process of a phone call using a tower other than the immediate tower next to it, I suppose that could be what you're referring to.
It is, yes, and sorry for using the crude language. Basically, if you could explain to this jury how somebody could be in the vicinity of a tower, be close to a tower and within one sector, but not communicating with that sector of that tower, but instead communicating with another tower or a further away tower.
Your question kind of anticipates that you would only connect to one tower from a particular location. It's certainly not the case. You could connect to a number of towers from any particular location, depending on where you happen to be in the circumstances at a particular time. The cell phone is going to connect to the tower with the strongest, cleanest signal. That could be the closest tower. It could not be the closest tower. It just depends on all the specifics of the network, of the geography, of the area at that particular point in time.
If there were a lot of traffic, and we're not talking about cell phone traffic, we're talking about vehicles, a lot of traffic on somewhere like Biscayne, rush hour, people on the phone, and there's a lot of traffic on one sector of one tower, could that cause somebody to not communicate with that sector and instead communicate with another tower?
Your question presupposes you would have automatically connected to that tower in the first place, and I don't know that that's necessarily the case. If you're suggesting that you've got two towers in one location, and because of network traffic at that point in time, you're unable to connect to cell tower A, and instead you connect to cell tower B, that's certainly possible. But regardless of that, you certainly have to be within the range of cell tower B.
And last question, that range. I know it's dependent on specific towers. You could be miles away from a tower and still communicating with that tower, right?
Depending on the tower, yes.
And this is not just 1 or 2 miles, this can go up to 10 or more miles, is that correct?
Depending on where you're at, absolutely.
One brief second, John. No further questions, thank you. Mr. Sawicki.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have one moment, Your Honor.
Somebody needs a break. All right, we'll take 10 minutes. Either side, anything?
No, sir.
No, Judge.
There.
All right, 10 minutes. have a seat, please? Second.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I want to start by asking you about the iCloud extraction that you looked at in comparison to the call detail records to determine that there were some messages from the call detail records that did not appear in the iCloud consistent with having been deleted, okay?
Consistent with not being there.
Not being there, excuse me. When you were using the call detail records to come up with your 3,084 text messages, SMS or MMS messages, were you just looking at the total numbers of text messages or the actual content to confirm that they were in fact text messages?
Frankly, that's the overall number, yes.
Okay, so that's the would you agree that sometimes when a cell phone is powered up, it receives you a notification that appears as a text message to alert you that you have a voicemail, for example?
It could do that occasionally, yes.
And that could appear to be a text message, although it's not.
It could.
So those were not excluded from that overall 3,084 number.
That's true.
Did you also look for that same time period Mr. Zangeneh asked you about at Catherine Magbanua's call detail records compared to her iCloud messages?
The copy of the iCloud messages I had for her didn't have content to them, so I wasn't able to compare them.
Did you compare the numbers?
No, I wasn't able to see the messages that were sent and received.
So despite the fact that some of those text messages did not appear on the iCloud, there was still evidence in Charlie Adelson's iCloud that Charlie Adelson and Catherine Magbanua were communicating.
That's correct.
And numerous of those messages were deleted.
That's true.
With respect to communications between Charlie Adelson or Luis Rivera, you found no evidence that Charlie Adelson communicated with Luis Rivera, did you?
That's true.
How many cell towers are there, cell sites are there between Charlie Adelson's residence in South Florida and Catherine Magbanua's?
I didn't count the number of towers, but it's a fair distance, so there's going to be a large number of towers.
Would you agree that the towers are closer together in a highly populated area such as the one relevant to this case?
Absolutely.
Okay. They're not miles and miles apart, these towers, are they?
That's correct.
Specifically, with respect to the time period on the morning of July 19th, 2014, between I believe it was 10:02 and 10:32 a.m.
Yes, ma'am.
We were talking about a cell site or tower that Catherine Magbanua's phone was communicating with. Do you recall those questions?
Yes, ma'am.
You would agree with me that the cell site Catherine Magbanua was communicating with during that time frame on July 19th, 2014 could be consistent with Jessica Rodriguez's house?
There certainly
Speculation.
Overruled.
I'm sorry, let me ask that again. Do you agree that the cell site Catherine Magbanua's phone is communicating with the morning of July 19th during that 10 to 10:30 time frame could be consistent with Jessica Rodriguez's house?
There's certainly activity during that time period that could be, yes.
Consistent with the house?
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that 11% of the activity for that particular antenna. Did you remember that 11% amount?
I do.
Would that be consistent with Catherine Magbanua being at Jessica Rodriguez's house as being her friend?
It could be.
Okay, one moment, Judge.
If I clarify a point on that, when you say it, I think you said 11.5%, are you talking about in usage time or in number of incidents?
Your Honor, that's the number of instances.
Okay.
I have no further questions, Judge.
All right.
Thank you.
Garcia.
You heard Ms. Norris ask you if there's any evidence of any activity between Charlie Adelson and Luis Rivera, correct?
Yes, sir.
You said no, right?
Yes, sir.
And that's because the evidence that you have is the iPhone, the one iPhone that's related to Luis Rivera, correct?
Objection leading.
sustained.
How many phones did you make that determination of that belonged to Luis Rivera?
None.
Were you aware if Luis Rivera had multiple throw phones?
I understand there's a number of devices that have been connected to him.
Do you have those phone numbers?
I don't have them now, no.
So when Ms. Norris, when the prosecutor asked you if there's any correlation between Charlie Adelson and Luis Rivera, you don't have all of Luis Rivera's contacts, correct?
Correct.
And if Charlie Adelson had been making FaceTime calls, would there be a record of that in the iCloud?
There could be.
Could there potentially not be a record of it if you deleted it right after you did it?
Correct.
As someone that testifies with regards to cell usage and telephones in general, are you aware that people that are involved in nefarious activities like drug dealers or gang members often use disposable phones?
Objection, lack of foundation and
Overruled.
I am familiar with that, yes.
And is that true?
It is.
No further questions.
All right, any juror have a question of this witness? All right, if not, you may step down. Do we need to keep him further? Anybody need him further? No, Your Honor. All right, you're excused.
Thank you.
Call your next witness.
Judge, if I can just get a few minutes to consult, we have no other witnesses, and then we can make a determination as to whether or not one side says something.
Well, we just got here, 5 minutes.
I understand that, but Mr. Garcia is here.
All right, we'll give you 10 minutes.
There's a quick time now. We have discussion with Mr. Garcia.
You need to discuss that with the bailiff. And, okay. We need to have, I need to make one comment after the jury's out. I do just want to put the attorneys on alert that if a defendant decides not to testify, I am going to colloquy the defendant to make sure they understand that that's their decision and they have a right to testify if they so choose. So just wanted to give you a heads up. So if you're having that discussion, we'll take 10 minutes.